Hey everyone, hello. So what I'm going to do right now is go through a couple of sentences that come directly from your revised literature reviews. I just want to talk a little bit of grammar. Unfortunately, you have to watch the whole video to see whether or not your sentence makes a guest appearance. But I do think there's something to be gained in watching this whole video and just looking at the way you can revise sentences. So, subject verb agreement using helping words, clarity of topic sentences, possessive nouns, use of semicolons, run on sentences. These are all of the things that we're going to talk about today. So, the first thing we're going to look at is this sentence right here. What I'm going to do is just hover over it so that you can follow along. Oops, let me get rid of my notes here. Okay, so you'll read ADHD defined as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, the diagnosed in children of the age range of 4 to 17 years old, and some are carried over into adulthood. Doctors prescribe two types of drugs to treat this disorder. There is amphetamines like Adderall and methylphenidates like Ritalin. Okay, so a couple of things. The first is to be careful of your word choice. So words have different forms depending on how you're using it, right? So if I want to say I diagnosed someone, meaning I, and then diagnosed becomes the verb, then you spell it the way it's spelled here, right? Diagnosed. That's a verb. However, if I want to indicate that this is a noun, this is a thing, this is an idea, then the form I would want to use is diagnosis, right? Or diagnostic, depending on what you're talking about. So this is an issue that I've been seeing time and time again in everyone's paper, really, not just this semester, but in every semester. Careful of word choice, right? Is your word being used as a noun, verb, adverb? Because sometimes if you're using something as an adverb, then it needs to, one, be spelt differently, and then two, the placement of the word could be different. So I'm going to give you a quick example. I am beautiful versus she played the instrument beautifully, right? So beautiful here is actually an adjective. It's describing the eye, whereas beautifully here is modifying a verb. Which verb is it modifying? Hopefully you're all saying played. And so you'll see also the spelling changes, and sometimes what happens is if you're unclear on how adverbs work, you might put she beautiful played the instrument, right? And that's actually incorrect. One, because it's not in the adverb form, but two, because it shouldn't go right before the verb, at least not in this sentence. So hopefully that clarified word choice. The next thing is this thing called the helping verb. Helping verbs should sound familiar to some of you. They're verbs like be, is, are, am, right? They assist main verbs so that the tense, the time in which the action is happening, is clear. So I give you an example here. Jack jumps. You don't need a helping verb because here it's in simple present tense. And the verb is totally strong enough to handle making it clear to the reader that this is happening now. Now, when we change it to Jack jumping, right, it needs a little bit of guidance. The readers are not sure of whether this is happening now, in the past, in the future, and so that's why helping verbs were created. So we have Jack is jumping or Jack was jumping. And so in this sentence here, the same thing is needed, right? ADHD defined as, no, it's currently being defined as this, and so therefore to clarify the tense, I would put ADHD is defined as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Okay, so hopefully that helped as well. The next thing I want to talk about in this sentence, and this is something that we'll talk about one more time, is the semicolon. The semicolon really should be used, and just so you know, the semicolon is this. It really should be used to separate two independent ideas. Now, semicolons are really used in like more stylized writing. So when you don't want to have your reader stop a thought, you put a semicolon so that the flow of the paper continues. But in traditional formal papers, you can use a period because, you know, a period is also used to separate two independent ideas. And so if you notice here, ADHD is defined as attention deficit disorder. The diagnosis in children of the age of 4 to 17 years old, and some are carried over into adulthood. These are not two distinct ideas. In fact, this might be an independent idea, but this is unclear, right? This, and now we'll change it because now we know. The diagnosis in children of the age range of 4 to 17 years old, and some are carried over into adulthood. This idea is unclear, and because it's unclear, it's incomplete. And so you wouldn't want to use a semicolon to separate. Instead, you would put a period here maybe and try to clarify what you mean here. I think what the student is saying is the diagnosis of ADHD in children between the ages of 4 to 17 years old, or maybe there is a diagnosis of ADHD in children between the ages of 4 to 17 years old, and then we can have a transition. In fact, some diagnoses are carried over into adulthood. Again, this is what I think, and this could actually be a period. This is what I think the student is saying, and so you'll see part of the difficulty becomes when you use a semicolon, your thoughts can be incomplete and your reader sort of has to put the puzzle pieces together. So we'll go with this for now, and then we have just doctors describe 2 types of drugs to treat this disorder, and then we have that semicolon again, right? There is amphetamines like Adderall and methylphenidates like Ritalin. So when you're listing something, you can actually use something called a colon, and here there is a list, and so you could say doctors prescribe 2 types of drugs to treat this disorder. And when you use the colon, you don't need to put there is anymore. You can just give the actual list. Amphetamines like Adderall and methylphenidates like Ritalin. Now, why am I getting rid of the parentheses? When you put something in parentheses, that means you don't want your reader to include it in the sentence. That means you don't want me to read it, right? At least not a part of the sentence. So look, if I were to get rid of this, it would be amphetamines like and methylphenidates like. That doesn't make any sense, and so we want to get rid of the parentheses. All right, so that's the revision of this one. And notice this one little passage from a revised lit review has a bunch of different things that need to be addressed. And that's part of the reason why revision is so important. And that's also part of the reason why when I'm noting that you're struggling with certain things, you want to practice, because you'll see it can pile up and make a sentence really unclear. All right, so let's get rid of that. All right, so now we have the use of neuroenhancing drugs have become a routine in many schools because of their hyper-competitive environment. This leads many to concentrate in the quantity of their work over the quality. This ends up encouraging the use of drugs that give students the ability to work longer and faster, but also easily loses focus and quality of their work suffers as a result. However, many are more than willing to take the risks. One such student, Alex, explained the reasons behind this during one of his interviews, eager to dispel the notion that students who took Adderall were academic automatons who are using it in order to be first in their class or in order to be an obvious admit to to law school or the first accepted at a consulting firm. In fact, he said it's often people, mainly guys, who are looking in some way to compensate for activities that are detrimental to their performance. So if you're not tired, I am, right? And why I'm tired is there is no period. This is a run-on. Every time you have a complete thought, before you can go to the next complete thought, you need to make a decision. Do you want to use a conjunction? That is fanboys, right? For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. And when you're using a conjunction, you usually use a comma as well. So do you want to use a comma plus a conjunction and then get to your next independent thought? Or do you want to use a semicolon, a conjunctive adverb, and a comma? That is therefore, in fact, consequently, right? These are all conjunctive adverbs, and I'll give you a list later on this semester. Or do I want to use a period? So you have to make that decision. What we have here is a bunch of commas, but you'll notice I didn't give you that option. You can't separate two independent thoughts just with a comma. That becomes a comma splice. If you've ever heard that or your instructor say that, it's basically a run-on. And it's a run-on because you're asking a comma to do more than it can actually do. A comma can do many things, but it cannot separate two independent thoughts on its own. And so I'm not going to do this whole example, but I did want you to see how frustrating it can be for the reader to try to figure out where to stop. And part of what happens when you have a run-on like this is you don't really understand anything that's going on because there's so many subjects and so many verbs. So how about we revise this? The use of neuroenhancing drugs have become a routine in many schools because of their hyper-competitive environment. Now I'll show you all of the options, right? So we can put a period here. This leads many to concentrate on the quantity of their work over the quality. And now I can put therefore, therefore, this ends up encouraging the use of drugs that give students, it should really be students, the ability to work longer and faster. And see this? This is what I was talking about, the conjunction with the comma, right? But also easily loses focus and quality of their work suffers as a result. Period. However, many are more than willing to take the risks. Now, just by putting periods and using any of these methods, so much has been clarified. And I still know there's some things that we need to work on, but at least now your reader is able to understand a little bit of what you're trying to say. So that's such a huge thing that you can do to improve your writing. Go through it and make sure that every time you have an independent thought, and I'll remind you, an independent thought means a clear subject and a clear verb. So here we have the neuroenhancement drugs, and have become is the verb. So that's how I know it's a complete sentence. And I also know it because when I look, every noun is clearly linked to this subject. Now, if I had a noun that wasn't linked to this subject, then it would become confusing and possibly be in need of more information. All right. And so let me just check my notes to make sure I covered everything. Oh, okay. So this is something that's really common. Overusing the word this. You don't need to say this. Okay, let me show you what happens. Okay, so Well, actually, let me leave that one there. So what I did in the first one is I just got rid of the this, and it says many concentrate in the quality of their work over the quality, right? So that is still clear, and I just got rid of this. Here, I have therefore this need ends up encouraging the use of drugs that give students the ability to work longer and faster, but also easily loses focus and quality of their work suffers as a result. So what I could do here is and so there are two things. This can be wordy because it's unnecessary, but it can also lead to confusion because sometimes you don't know what is this referring to. So here, what is the this referring to? I think it's referring to this need to focus on quantity over quality. And so what I would do actually is put or instead of therefore, let's just put period. The focus on quantity ends up encouraging the use of drugs that give students the ability to work longer and faster, but also easily loses focus and quality of their work suffers as a result. However, many are more than willing to take the risks. Okay, so again, if you're overusing this, figure out, first of all, is your reader clear on what this is, and is there a way you can eliminate it? Now, the third thing and the final thing about this that I wanted you to see is sort of how the use of possessive pronouns. Possessive pronouns are her, his, their, our, right? You need to make sure when you're using these pronouns that one, it's the correct pronoun, right? If you're talking about two boys and you want to talk about a coat that they own, it wouldn't be his coat, it would be their coat. Why? Because there are two boys, not one. So if you notice here, quality of their work, that's actually fine. Oh, I see what I did. Originally, it was the use of drugs that give student the ability to work longer and faster, but also easily loses focus and quality of their work. If it was student, it shouldn't be there. It actually should be his or her work. But because I changed it to be plural, just because it sounded better, then the there is accurate. It's okay. Still a lesson that you learned. All right, so I'm done with this example. Now let's go to the next one, which is here. One of the theories behind the use of stimulants is to improve an individual. Yet all three authors suggested more human approach, like good food or 8 hours of very deep sleep, because success is not necessarily equal to happiness. Okay. So the first thing is the use of, I should actually leave this here, the use of a articles, right? A, and the. You use a when you're referring to a countable noun for the first time. That is something that you can count, something that there can be multiple versions of. What does that mean? There can be multiple approaches that I can count, but there can't be multiple salt, right? Salt is like a thing that you're unable to count. So in that way, that's how you distinguish between a countable noun or a noun that's just one finite thing. And so you'll see, yeah, all three authors suggested more human approach. It should actually be, if you're focusing on one specific approach, the first time you say it, it should say it suggested a more human approach. So again, you're using this article to indicate it's one specific approach, and this is the approach I'm talking about for the first time, so then I'm going to say and then I also feel like this could be just simplified a little bit. So how I would do this, all three authors, or rather, the three authors suggested a more human approach because success is not necessarily equal to happiness. And that's it. And then I would give the example. For example, a human approach would include healthy food and or 8 hours of deep sleep, right? So here you actually have a run-on, but it ends up just needing to be in 2 very separate sentences. Yeah, so I just want to make sure I covered everything. I think I did. You'll let me know if there's any questions, either via email or you could actually comment on this video. Okay, so next we have, in some cases, women cause their own repression. According to E&L, professions and college majors are dominated by one sex. However, even in traditional female professions, men are paid more. Even women are paying women less. Martin quotes, when speaking about the production of sperm, she states, "How is this feat accomplished?" Then Martin states, "None of these texts expresses such intense enthusiasm for any female processes, not even from the female author." According to Lemaster, women resist the feminist label. The good news is we have allies. So this is not a grammatical thing. This is a just, if you say that you're going to talk about women causing their own repression, then you need to talk about it in very, very clear terms. The first thing the reader is going to want to know is, how do women do this? Right? The second thing they're going to want to know is, where in the articles does it state this? And remember, this is a literature review. So what I also need is your review of the evidence that the authors use to support this argument. Because this becomes, right here, an argument that the 2 sources are making. So when you say that Erickson believes that majors are dominated by one sex, you need to explain to me, where do they get that information? And is it reliable, right? If you don't put this there, then it reads as like a sort of your own opinion and not really a literature review. The other thing is, you really need to explain a little bit about what Martin is doing in these quotes before it's clear that she's talking about the repression of women, or women causing their own repression. So that was just me wanting to show. I think this is something that we all struggled with, right? We set ourselves up to do this thing in our topic sentence, but then our paragraph ends up doing something completely different. That's why revision is important. You go back and you make sure you actually are doing what you say you're going to do. And then just watch out for tone. This happened to a lot of you. I think this is meant to be sarcastic. In a lit review, you don't want to be sarcastic. It's a very formal, serious paper, and so you want to watch your tone. Other examples of this, some of you said, clearly Black people are being targeted for no good reason, and we need to watch out, right? That's an example of it's not assessing the articles, it's just an opinion, and the tone is also shifting. So all of these cool little stylistic things you're doing, you can do in an argumentative essay, but you can't do in a literature review. All right, hopefully that was helpful. All right, on to the next one, right? The police are not protecting the citizens. Instead, they are violating the citizens' amendments. So do you remember way back when, in the beginning of this video, when I talked about conjunctive adverbs? You don't? Well, that's okay, because conjunctive adverbs are, again, therefore, instead, rather than, right? They're basically high energy conjunctions. What do you need when you're using a conjunctive adverb? Do you remember? That's okay. You need a semicolon, the adverb, and a comma. So what do you think I'm going to say needs to be fixed here? That's right. If you're using a conjunctive adverb, you need to have the semicolon and the comma. You'll notice one adverb or one word that is not a conjunctive adverb is because. You do not need to separate because with a comma in the middle of a sentence. And when I say that, I mean if you have an independent clause and then you have a because and then a dependent clause, you do not need a comma here. A lot of you are doing that. Unnecessary. Okay, so that's part one. The next thing is use of possession, right? So these amendments belong to someone. Who do they belong to? The citizens. So if they belong to the citizens, then there needs to be an apostrophe. I'm not going to go over this because this is something that can clearly be addressed if you just review possessive nouns. Okay. Next. Holland backs up his argument with the case of the schoolgirl being manhandled and by providing brief details about previous cases that involve police abuse against women. Holland backs up his argument with the case of the schoolgirl. Oh, okay. So this is a very simple one. When you say the, you're assuming that your reader knows what you're talking about. Like, oh, did you hear about the attack that happened? Did you hear about the movie actor, right? You're assuming that your reader knows. In this case, your reader does not know what you're referring to, and so you should say a, right? Right now, you're talking about something specific, but your reader doesn't have any clue as to what it is, so you want to use the article a. Holland backs up his argument with the case of a schoolgirl being manhandled and by providing brief details about previous cases that involve police abuse against women. So here, your verb is in present progressive. Here, it's in simple present. Do yourself a favor and be consistent. And so what you can do is you can just say provides. Holland backs up his argument with the case of a schoolgirl being manhandled and provides brief details about previous cases that involve police abuse against women. Present progressive verbs, that is verbs that end in ing, are very problematic because they need helping verbs, right? Remember is, am, are, was, and also can be difficult if you're starting off your sentences with them. So what I always suggest is when possible, use simple present or simple past. Okay. All right. So now we have right here, and this is something that's very common. All of us have been struggling with this. So you write here, you have in both articles, Brain Gain, the drugs by Highland, and this article by Healy discuss the idea that neuroenhancers drugs are the new drug of the 21st century. So, couple of things. If you're starting your sentence with a prepositional phrase, that is a phrase that begins with in, to, from, right? After the phrase is done, so in the book, you need to present the subject. You cannot present the verb. If you do that, it becomes a fragment. In the article, when it's attached to a preposition, is not a subject. It's a prepositional phrase. It's one of those weird things in the English language. So again, if you have a prepositional phrase starting off your sentence, you need to, right after the comma, make the subject clear. So instead of saying, so if you have in the book, you would put the author discusses whatever they discuss, right? So that's how you adjust this part over here. What you could also do is just get rid of the prepositional phrase and say Brain Gain by Talbot, The Drugs Do Work by Hyland, and Prescribing ADHD Drugs by Healy discuss the idea that neuroenhancer drugs are the new drug of the 21st century, and people should educate themselves about this drug that may or may not help them. Just by doing that, getting rid of the prepositional phrase, all of the sentence errors go away. So if you're going to use it, make sure you have a subject right after, or just get rid of the prepositional phrase altogether. All right, so that's finished. Now let's look at, and what I want to actually do is, this was something that a lot of us had an issue with. Uh-oh. Okay, there you go. And that is subject-verb agreement. So these are 3 examples of subject-verb agreement issues. Another article that explained how the use of these drugs is increasing in society is Smart Pills. When you have a singular subject, you need to make sure the verb is singular as well. When you have a singular verb in present tense, the way that you make it singular is by adding an S. So if Jack is the subject and he's jumping right now, it would be Jack jumps. Why? Because Jack is one person and jump is in present tense, so to make it singular, I add that S. So how would you fix the above statement? I want to give you a couple seconds. Another article that hopefully you all are saying, you add an S here. Because article is singular and explain is the verb in present tense, so it needs the S. All right, let's look at another example. Beline proposed a solution to student loan problem that increasing college tuition fee is way to transfer money from rich student to poor student, and this will help to reduce this problem. So again, proposes a solution to the, right? Because it's a problem that your readers are aware of, at least in this instance, because the student has been talking about it, and is a way to transfer money because it's countable. There can be multiple ways. All right. A good degree offer more opportunity to a student to aim for a better career. Hopefully you're all saying good degree, singular, offer, present tense. So it should be, you should add the S. All right. That one was, I'm hoping, easy for all of you. One of the most harmful side effects is how addictive Adderall is. Now, this is just a stylistic thing. Whenever possible, you want your subject to be as close to the beginning of the sentence. And this is just stylistically, it's more advanced. And it also, when we were talking about logos, pathos, and ethos, it works towards your credibility because it shows you have a strong handle on the English language. And so the way you would do this is Adderall has many, or Adderall is addictive, right? Adderall has many harmful side effects, including addiction. Why is this so important? Because Adderall is the subject and it's very close to the beginning. Here I don't know what the subject is until I get to the very end. That's something called passive tense, and you usually want to avoid passive tense, or actually passive writing, because it can become really confusing and hard for your readers to understand what's happening to who. Okay, so we'll get rid of that. Now let's look at this. Oh, and this, well, actually, let's go to this one first, because this is another subject-verb agreement. Dr. Elnicki tried to explain why cognitive enhancers were not beneficial for the long term, but there were not enough evidence for his argument. So here, cognitive enhancers, that's plural, and were is also plural. So here it works. But then we have, but there were not enough evidence for his argument. Now the tricky thing here is, what is there were referring to? It's actually referring to this bit about evidence, An evidence is a singular idea. So it shouldn't be there were, it should be there was. And there are rules about there and every that you should look up if this is something that's confusing. There and every don't work the same way in terms of subject-verb agreement. So maybe you thought because it was there, it should be plural, but it actually doesn't matter. There is not important. There is not the noun. It is evidence. That's the noun, and that's why it has to be singular. All right, so that's good. I want to make sure we touch all of the, okay. Oh, you know what? Let's look at this one too. Cognitive enhancement drugs have been shown to improve a person in order to do better in their lives, such as school. What do you think we're going to look at here? Uh-oh, what did I do? Semicolon, right? Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. The semicolon. So the semicolon, you'll remember, separates two independent ideas, such as school is not a thought that can exist on its own. Your readers wouldn't be able to understand what's going on, so that semicolon becomes unnecessary. Cognitive enhancement drugs have been shown to improve a person in order to do better in their lives. That's a little wordy. I think what you could say here, and again, clarity and simplicity are going to be your best friends. Cognitive enhancement drugs improve people's lives. And then you could even say one example would be a person who does better in school while taking Adderall, right? So now all of a sudden we've even gotten more specific. Yeah, so let me just, I want you to see the difference. Just for a second, because sometimes that can help. Cognitive enhancement drugs have been shown to improve a person in order to do better in their lives, such as school. Cognitive enhancement drugs improve people's lives. One example would be a person who does better in school while taking Adderall. I guess you could make the argument that it's a stylistic thing and it's a personal choice. I still think, though, that this version is clearer because I'm clear on what's happening with cognitive enhancement drugs. The part that sort of gets me confused is this part. So that's why I just chose to get rid of it. All right. So now let's go to this big paragraph here. The war on crack speaks on how crack happens to be one of the main drugs that target minorities to become incarcerated. Every 20 seconds, someone in America is arrested for a drug violation. Every week, on average, a new jail or prison is built to lock up more people in the world's largest penal system. This is a strong point because the author is telling us how often people are being incarcerated because of drug violation and how more prisons are being built because of it. The author is arguing that prisons are built frequently because of the incarceration of minorities that are violating drug laws. So I want you to now see that there are many issues we already talked about with articles and plural subject-verb agreement that are going on here. Hopefully now that we've talked about it, you're able to identify it. For me, what's important here is the topic sentence. The topic sentence, one, you'll see it's unclear if this is the title of the article and this is a quote, or if this entire thing is the article title. And that's because of the quote, right? It's really important that you go back and you proofread. When you're talking about your ethos, if you have errors everywhere, especially errors that could have clearly been prevented by rereading, it shows that you didn't really care, which might not be the truth, but that's what it implies. So you do definitely want to reread. So if you're saying, let's just imagine that this is the topic sentence, the problem becomes you never want to start a paragraph with a quote, right? If you're saying that this is from your own words, that means that the whole paragraph is going to be about crack. And the whole paragraph is not about crack. It's actually about incarceration. So and this is something we all struggled with, I want you to be clear on making sure your topic sentence is related to what your whole paragraph is talking about. Okay? So I'm going to get rid of that. Student Loans, The Problem and Solution by Bradshaw discusses possible solutions by the government for student loans debt. Okay, so there are many things you can do with a comma, right? The one thing you can never do with a comma is separate a subject and a verb. Imagine a subject and a verb as lifelong partners. A comma gets in the way of that, and you never want to get in the way of that. So what is the subject here? The title, right? That's the idea of the paragraph. And what's the verb? Discusses. So this little thing has to go away. So never, ever, ever use a comma to separate a subject from its verb. Now, it's quite possible if you have, for example, Jack jumps, but he cannot climb, right? In that case, Jack jumps is attached to Jack, climb is attached to he. So it's okay that we have the comma here, right? And you'll also notice that Jack jumps is independent and he cannot climb is independent. So it totally works. But in this case, you cannot separate with a comma. Imagine it's sort of like, I don't want to say a home wrecker, but if that's one way to remember it, then by all means, go for it. So never separate a subject with its verb unless you want to be a comma wrecker. How about that? Okay. Let's go here. Oh, we already did this, sorry. Oh, we're almost done. Hopefully everyone's still awake. Oh, we can get rid of this too. The Social Security of these seniors is supported by testimonies from older people. Okay, so this was a topic sentence. The Social Security of these seniors is supported by testimonies from older people. So grammatically, there's no specific rule that I can tell you about that's making this unclear, other than I would just put what is the author arguing and how is it supported by testimonies from older people. Because what it seems like you're saying here is we know that Social Security is withheld because of the testimonies from older people, which actually does make sense. It's just that it should be clarified, and I'll give you an example. Testimonies from older people prove that Social Security is withheld from older or from seniors, right? And then I probably got this from a source. So I'm going to put the source's last name of author and period. So again, the trick really is to get the subject to be as close to the beginning as possible. I know you're saying, no, but the subject is Social Security. Yeah, it is, but it also seems to be really important that testimonies gets its own moment. In fact, I think testimony is the real subject of the sentence, and for that reason, I would put it towards the beginning. Okay. All right, and the final one. In Are We Evolving Tech, or Is Tech Evolving Us? By Brad Chacos. Our brains wouldn't even need to remember information. So, we talked about how if you're using a prepositional phrase like in, from, you need to make sure that the subject is presented right after the comma. But just in general, when you're talking about articles, let's talk about ways that you could bring up articles. You can say, according to author, and then whatever it is you want to say, right? So according to author, our brains wouldn't even need to remember information, right? That's one way you can do it, because remember, MLA is really just looking for the author's last name. The other thing you can do is you can say, in Chacos's, Chacos's, are we evolving? Readers, and see, this is the thing. In Chacos's, are we evolving? Actually, it should be in Are We Evolving? Chacos states, discusses, whoa, what did I just do? I'm sorry. Okay. That was trippy. In Are We Evolving? Chacos states, discusses, argues, some sort of verb that our brains wouldn't even need to remember information. Okay, so these are two different ways you could bring up articles. You don't need to put in this article by this person. Our brains wouldn't even need to. It's an awkward way to talk about articles. So for those of you who are looking for new ways to bring up articles, these are my two suggestions, according to just the last name of the author and then what you want to say, or if you really like that prepositional phrase, in article, author, what is the author doing, and then the information that they're bringing up. Hopefully this was super informative. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all I will see you all on Monday.